Hi, everybody. We're back from Williamsport, Pennsylvania. My name is Nick Caringi. I'm the Senior Director of Operations and Education here in Little League International. I have with us online Nina Johnson-Pitt from the Central Region. Nina, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Nick.
And I also have online Corey Wright. Corey is the Assistant Director of the East Region up in Bristol, Connecticut. Corey, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Nick. Good afternoon, Nina.
Always the gentleman, Corey is. So let's move on. I think what we're going to do real quick, we're just going to have a conversation about protests. We know that this is probably one of the most important areas of tournament that's frequently sometimes doesn't happen correctly. So what I want to do is bring up some slides, and we'll take a look and see if we can have Nina and Corey walk us through the slides. So just kind of bear with me if you would. You should be able to see those slides. Corey, Nina, you guys see them?
Yes, sir.
I see them.
Very good. Nina, let's start with you. Let's talk a little bit about protests. And we all know that this replaces the regular 4.19 rule in our regular season rule books. But I'm going to just kind of turn it over to you and let you kind of talk about some of your experiences with protests and some of the challenges that we've had as an organization with them. And hopefully we can try to solve some of those through our brief call today.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. So one of the things that tournament directors and managers and league presidents need to understand is that once the Little League International tournament starts, it really becomes a whole new ballgame, to throw in a baseball term there. But any protest that comes up really has to be resolved by the tournament committee. And we have a chain of command and a process for resolving those. And when you put it in perspective and think about the number of tournament games that are played on any night during the Little League International Tournament, the process really works well, and it really helps us streamline and get things resolved in a timely manner so the games can continue to play on. So one of the things to remember about protests is that they can only be based on a handful of items. We get lots of protest calls about judgment calls, so whether a runner is out at first or safe at first, and the manager didn't like the umpire's call, and so he's going to protest it. And that's something that isn't protestable. One of the things to protest would be the violation or misinterpretation of a playing rule. So a judgment call wouldn't necessarily fall under that. So that's something that couldn't be protested. And so when we do receive those calls, if they can't be resolved by the tournament director at the site and they come to us, anything based on a judgment call would be a denied protest. One of the other items that can be protested is an ineligible pitcher. So as we talk more today, we'll talk about what to do when that comes up during the game or after the game, and the process is a little bit different. And then another thing we'll talk about would be use of an ineligible player, and when that comes up as well, it's handled a little bit differently. And then the last item that can be protested would be mandatory play, and if there's a violation of that. So no matter what it is that's protested, basically the same process is followed. And we'll talk more about that as we go on here to the next slide, and I'll toss it back to you, Nick, to go on with that.
So Corey, when we talk about the misinterpretation of a playing rule, and Nina kind of touched upon it, an out or a safe call is a judgment call, which judgment calls are not protestable. The other thing that comes to mind with regards to a playing rule or a misinterpretation, some people will try to protest obstruction or interference, not the actual interpretation of the rule, but they'll try to protest whether it actually was obstruction or interference, and that in itself is still a judgment call and not protestable. So with that, Corey, just walk us through the misinterpretation of playing rules.
Sure. You and Nina hit it right on the square of the head with that. Misinterpretation of playing rules is probably one of the easiest protests we can resolve in a very short and timely and efficient manner. If there is a protest of a playing rule or the misinterpretation of such, a formal protest is made by the manager or coach to the umpire in chief on the field before the next pitch or play. If it's not done before the very next pitch or play that happens, then the protest is now null and void. But of course, when they do make the protest and it's done properly, the umpire-in-chief then can call a conference with all the other umpires. They can get together and render their decision, whether the play stands or the call stands, or if they need to resolve it and change it. If it's not resolved, then that manager and coach has the option to go towards the tournament director or the district administrator there administering the game. If he can or she cannot help, then the district administrator will immediately call the regional office, and that's very important that the regional office is called so we can help resolve it. If we can't, and the manager is still unhappy with the interpretation or the ruling that we're providing, we will call the tournament committee in Williamsport, get them on the phone, allow them to give their insight to us, give their ruling, which is final and binding, and then we will convey that back to the district administrator and tournament director so they can inform the manager and coach and the game can proceed.
I think what's important, Corey, as we go back to Nina and talk about use of an ineligible pitcher, is that frequently managers and coaches, more so managers, don't really understand that they have that right to protest. By signing the affidavit, they've signed that they understand the protest situation, they understand that they're responsible for all the data on that affidavit to be true and accurate. But they also should understand that they have the right to protest certain situations. If they are not protestable, then obviously whether it's an umpire or whether it's a tournament director or even a regional staff person can give them that direction and just say, listen, that's not a protestable call. But they still have that opportunity and that right to follow the chain of command and go all the way up through to the tournament committee in Williamsport. So, Nina, I'll just turn this over to you to talk about ineligible pitcher, which fortunately doesn't happen an awful lot, but still does in some cases. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Nick. One of the most important things to keep in mind about an ineligible pitcher is that if it can be avoided at all, it should be avoided. Everyone at the game site should be working together to make sure that an ineligible pitcher never makes it to the mound. And so if we're all doing our jobs there, hopefully it's not something that we have to deal with. But from time to time, it does come up. And you're right, it's not very often anymore because most folks are understanding that we should all be working together on that. But when it does come up, if it's something that comes up during the game, certainly the manager or the coach of the other team can lodge the protest with the umpire-in-chief. So the process starts out the same way as it does with the misinterpretation of a playing rule that Corey talked about. So they bring it up with the umpire-in-chief, who then will have to speak with the tournament director and or the district administrator to confirm whether or not the pitcher really is an ineligible pitcher. And if it's determined that it is an ineligible pitcher, so maybe I should even back up and talk more about what constitutes an ineligible pitcher. So basically we're talking about a kid who previously pitched and hasn't gotten the proper amount of rest to be pitching again. That's primarily when it comes up, where he was supposed to have 4 days and maybe it's 3 days, or it's a level where double headers are permitted and maybe he pitched in a previous game and exceeded the amount of pitches to be able to pitch in the second game in the day. So when that does come up and it's confirmed that the pitcher is ineligible, and then the tournament director or district administrator would make that call to the regional director, who would then in turn take the information that's collected and call the tournament committee in Williamsport, who would give a decision. And typically the penalty for use of an ineligible pitcher is that the manager is suspended for the team's next two-play game. But certainly if the committee considered some other information that required that they take some additional action, they could do that. So once that information is all presented and the tournament committee makes their decision, the regional director then conveys that back to the tournament director, who would share it with the manager and coach. And as always, the decision of the tournament committee is final and binding.
And that's kind of the process that happens during a game. Corey, when we have a situation of an ineligible pitcher that becomes known after a game, what are some of the steps that we need to take?
Sure, and the process is almost exactly identical that you would follow during the game, but after the game, the one key is that the protest can be made before either team plays another game, and that's the key. Once a team plays another game and it was discovered that there was an ineligible pitcher that was utilized, it's now null and void because another team has moved on and has played. However, if the protest is made before either play another game, then it will come to us at the regional center, and we once again will call the tournament committee. Committee will review it and make a decision based on the actual pitches recorded and what's on the affidavit, and then that decision's final and binding. And the one key that I would note on this, and I'm sure Nina runs into this as much as I do, the one part of the affidavit before a game that the opposing manager may see is the pitching record. So the managers are well aware, because they have to sign the affidavit that constitutes that they understand what's the pitching qualifications, and they initial after every game of what their pitchers have thrown. So before their next game, the opposing manager may view the pitching record of that team, so he or she will know who's eligible to pitch and who is not.
That's a good point. And that's the situation with an ineligible pitcher after a game, and Corey brings that to light. I mean, when you have a protest after the game, just to reiterate, it has to be filed and has to have a decision before either team is affected begins another game. And there have been situations where the game is quickly played the next day, in which the tournament committee really has to get down to it and figure out what's going on and to handle that particular protest. So that happens an awful lot. So Nina, you touched upon the use of an ineligible pitcher in terms of some of the penalties. What are some of the other penalties that, according to this next slide, that we would probably, as a tournament committee, take action on?
Well, I think, Nick, one of the things that becomes hard to explain during the tournament is that, in the beginning we talked about the manager signing the affidavit stating that they understand the playing rules, and particularly the rules regarding pitchers and eligibility. And it's important that that manager understand that ultimately it absolutely relies on his or her shoulders. And so they are solely responsible for ensuring that their pitchers that they're putting on the mound are eligible. And so when that doesn't happen, it absolutely comes back down to the manager. And in addition, if the tournament committee determines that there's been, blatant disregard for the pitching rules, or just negligence, whatever they determine based on the information that's provided, they could take some additional action, which could include disqualifying a particular player, the team, or the entire league, and that could even come to taking some additional action against the league going forward, against the league's charter. So depending on the information that's provided, depending on how blatant it is, the committee does have the authority to take some of that additional action. And one other thing that I would mention is that for use of an ineligible pitcher, it isn't even something that necessarily has to be protested by an opposing manager. If it's something that comes to the committee's attention, whether the tournament director discovers it or the district administrator, and it's then brought to the committee's attention, the committee can still take some action for violation of the pitching rules and using an ineligible pitcher.
Well, that's a great point, because Nina, as a member of the committee, we've had a number of decisions, not very many, like I said before, but a number that, as you stated, were just blatant disregard for the rules because they were trying to advance through the tournament. And that usually falls back on the manager, and sometimes it has fallen back on the league, in which we've said, listen, your league, not just your division team, but your league may be in jeopardy of participating in the rest of the tournament season at other levels. So the tournament committee really has that authority to make that happen if they find out, in fact, that the league is blatantly disregarding policies and rules, and that really comes with an ineligible player. And that's kind of a perfect segue, Corey, to the next slide. The use of an ineligible player known before the game. What are some of the processes that we need to go through?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. This is one that we try to resolve before games are even played. Obviously, with the tournament affidavits and the verification forms being checked by the district administrator and his or her staff before the tournament gets underway, usually we can avoid a lot of these problems or issues or concerns prior to the game or the tournament even starting. But usually this issue will come up if it's going to be before a game when a team advances to the next level and there's a discrepancy in paperwork, whether it be residency or the school enrollment form. Now, but if it's discovered before the game, a coach or a DA or a tournament director can make the protest. Obviously, the regional center would need to be called immediately, and we would take down the facts of the matter. We may even want to view some of the documents if that's what it's about, whether it's residency or school enrollment or participation in enough games during the regular season, whatever that may be. We may ask the tournament director or DA to get us that information, whether by email or fax, and then we'll bring it to the tournament committee. But in all of this, what's very important to remember is that it has to be done before the first pitch of the game. Once a pitch is thrown, then it becomes the use of an ineligible player during the game, which I'm sure we're going to talk about here. But if we can establish the facts, resolve it before the game, before a pitch is thrown, or before that player plays or the team plays, that's what we want to do. And of course, the tournament committee would make that decision.
Well, and Nina talked about this a little earlier as well. We all have a responsibility to play the game correctly. And if we find out that there's something going on or that there's some suspicion of an ineligible player, we owe it to each other, both as a staff, but more so as a volunteer base, to try to work that out prior to the game and make sure that we're playing a game without any problems that could come after it. So with that, Nina, we talk about prior to a game finding an ineligible player, but if we have facts establishing or verifying the eligibility of a player during a game, what are some of the steps we need to take?
Sure. Obviously, like we've all said, we hope we don't end up in this position. But when we do, if there's some information that comes out once the game has started that there may be an ineligible player participating, the process isn't too much different to follow than what we would do before the game. But once the game has started, there would generally not be a reason to stop the game. I mean, the player has started participating in the game, and therefore, if there's a violation, it's happening. And no matter how much of the game that's participated in, it's still a violation. So if some information comes up during the game, the opposing manager can lodge that protest with the umpire-in-chief, who then is going to get with the tournament director or district administrator and share the information. And then the tournament director or district administrator should immediately call the regional office and share the information. And like Corey said, we'll work with them to gather facts, and we may even ask for that documentation to view. And so then once we've gathered the information, we would get with, we would call the tournament committee and share the information that we'd gathered, and they would make a decision. If the information that's presented determines that the player is ineligible, there could be some action that's going to come out of that, and I probably jumped ahead to the next slide here, but I'll toss it back, and Corey will cover what's going to happen next when that comes to us.
So Corey, before you cover a situation that happens with an ineligible player after a game, here's what I will say with regards to the tournament committee. Usually, when someone suggests that the other team has an ineligible player, we as the tournament committee will gather the facts, but we're also going to gather the facts from those that are protesting that particular player. So, what do they have for evidence that states that they don't live within the league's boundaries, or that person's ineligible? So it's not just up to the local league that's being protested to prove eligibility. We also ask the protesting league, listen, what do you have? Why do you say that this person's ineligible? Or are you just picking the biggest person on the team and saying he can't live there, or he's been seen in this other school or whatever? So I mean, that just so everyone knows, and for the viewers that are watching this, we do our due diligence from a tournament committee to try to find out all the information from both sides and make a very informed decision. So with that, Corey, if we have a situation that happens after a game, what do we have to do?
Sure, and as the viewers are watching, you can see that a lot of these in the steps in the process that go along with making the protest during or before or after the game, they're all very similar and consistent, and that's what we want. And you can see that if it's found that or believed that there's an ineligible player after the game, everything stays the same. The manager will bring it to the tournament director or the DA. Then that district administrator or tournament director will make the protest, call us. and we will go through the tournament director just like we would in any other case. Obviously, like Nick, you alluded to, we want what evidence or what proof or what documentation or backup do you have that supports the protest or supports the claim that the player is eligible. And after the committee reviews it, they'll make the decision. And on the slide, like you had shown, the committee's decision is final and binding, and it can be anything from the disqualification of the entire team, the player, a forfeit of a game, the removal of the manager and coach, or actions against the league for the following years regarding tournament or regular season chartering ability. Could be anything. It's very important, and Nina we've talked about this many times. Our program is fair, and everybody in tournament obviously wants their teams and children to do well, but they know it's fair, and everyone has to go through the same documentation and process and procedure to get to where anybody else is. So the use of ineligible players has gone way down with our paperwork, and we've made it easier for everyone. But if it does happen, it's important that the regional centers can handle it through the tournament committee and get it resolved before anyone plays another game and get moving with the right direction.
That's a good point, Corey. As we finish up regarding this, this webcast that we did, we kind of threw it together relatively quickly because I felt it was important to have some information out there about protests. So with that, just a closing note. Do either of you have any suggestions for leagues or districts as they handle protests or see a protest coming to light? We'll start with Corey. Corey, what do you have for me?
I guess the one thing, and when we go out and visit local leagues and district administrators, we want them to know that we're accessible. It's not just at 5 o'clock the offices close and everyone goes on their way. What's important is we all have phone numbers that we're reached on, and we're on call all the way until curfew. So no one can ever use the excuse, well, I couldn't get through or I couldn't reach anybody. We're always here. The entire regional staff and the entire tournament committee can call at any time, and we'll get the issue resolved. And that's important, that if there's ever a question or a concern, call the regional center so we can get it resolved.
That's a good point. Nina, anything else to add?
Yeah, that was a good point, Corey. I would just add that for managers, coaches, presidents, player agents, district administrators, all those people that are signing the affidavit, please read what you sign. When you sign your name on that affidavit, you're signing that you understand not only the protest process, but that the information is true and accurate. And don't sign that unless that's what you actually are agreeing to. The number of calls that we get here in the office the day after a game from managers saying, well, I didn't understand that I could protest. I didn't understand that, the umpire told me that we had to play or forfeit. I wanted to protest. I mean, read what you're signing, and if necessary, stick to that. Keep your team in the dugout until the protest is resolved to your satisfaction. You have that right. So that's really the big thing that I would share with all those people involved in tournament.
That's very important. Nina, Corey, thanks for joining us. We'll conclude this particular session, and hopefully we'll have a few more to give some people some guidance through tournament. So thanks for joining us.
Sounds good. Thanks.